let's get going. All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2022 semester at Durham, and it's week 9, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And this week, what we're talking about, it says intro to mean, but really at the end of the day, what this is it's an intro to Node.js. Yeah, that's what it is, an intro to Node.js. And let's talk about what this is for us and what we're doing. So last week we got together, we talked about TypeScript, what that was. We talked about how TypeScript is syntactic sugar, or some kind of superset of JavaScript that adds typing, strong typing, as well as better tooling for JavaScript to make JavaScript easier and better. Okay, that's what we talked about. And we actually used TypeScript to convert our JavaScript application, single page application, to a format that works nicely with GitHub pages. That's what we did. So that was last week. So what are we doing this week? This week we're going to be talking about a 3-tier web application framework. We're going to talk about it as MVC. We're going to talk about what that is, and we're also introducing full stack development. We've talked about it before: Mean, Mern, Maven, all these different kinds of solution stacks that are out there. How they compare to something like the AMP stack, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, which is basically what Node is made to improve on, right? We're also going to be talking a little bit about NPM and some other changes. We're going to talk about Node.js generally, as well as something called CommonJS modules and how they link together, because remember that if we're using something on the back end, there's no, web page to kind of link everything together. There's no glue like we have in our index.html. We got to find another type of glue to put things together or wire things up, if you will. And we're going to use something called CommonJS modules. And there's 2 types: CommonJS, or CJS as it's called, as well as Ecmascript 6 module pattern, right? Which we're going to talk about as well. So what's due? In-class exercise 9 right now should be due. I will make it due on Saturday if it's not already out and due. So be careful about this. I'll also have the lab report ready to go and everything else. That's going to be due on Saturday. And lab 3 is currently due on Sunday for you and your partner. And other stuff that's due is lab 4 has been released. I've already made it available for you on DC Connect. So you can actually look at lab 4. It has to do with making a portfolio site that's secure, and it's working on using Node.js and Express. Okay, that's what it is. So that is this week. And we're sitting at week 9, where we do an intro to Node.js. We have, this week is a bigger week. It's 17% of your final grade, because we have lab 3 that is pending to be delivered, plus ICE 9. Right, so that's 17%. And next week we start going down the path of Express.js. After that, we're going to hit Mongo and how to connect our data store, authentication. The week after that, we're going to continue with full CRUD with Mongo and Express. And then we're going to hit authentication with JSON Web Tokens, followed by a special topics week that'll include probably a React front end with a back-end API of Express. Okay, so now you guys should starting to get an understanding of where we're going, and it's going to be kind of the culmination of everything we've done this semester. Again, this is all things being equal, and we talked about what that equal thing means before this class started. All right, so let's get into this piece, which is all around 3-tier web application development. What is 3-tier? And what does it mean? Well, we talk about the 3 levels or layers, and we kind of talked about that earlier. And from the front end perspective, the first class almost we got together, I discussed something called progressive enhancement. And progressive enhancement is this idea of layering different components of our front end or client side. Okay, so we said that the first component should be structure, then layered on top of that like a cake is the layout, and after that we have our behavior. And we can't have really a good solid website without, at least on the front end, without each of those layers being addressed in the proper order. first structure and content. Content is king, and then everything else. At the same time, when we convert our website into our web application, we have both a front end and a back end and a data store. Those are the three things that kind of convert our website into a web application. And the three layers are the data layer, which is the model, the presentation layer, which is we call the view, and the logic layer, which we usually call the controller. There's our model view controller. And that's the three tiers we talked about before, right? And when we think about web applications, the application structure usually breaks down to some kind of database, the client, and the server. And then when we talk about modern web development, we can break it down even further, and we can say the database, and there's two types of logic or two types of controllers. We have our server logic, which is including things like routing and a connection to the database and all that kind of stuff. Client logic, which is usually something called a view controller. And finally, our client UI, which is all the views. And sometimes they also include view templates, okay, more than one view template. So that is our MVC framework. And what we also think about this is we use the MVC paradigm. The Greek word for paradigm is paradigma. That's where it comes from. It means example, right? And so we use this example or this prototype, this pattern, if you will, right? And we use it because we want to separate concerns. We have different kinds of concerns. People are concerned with the back end. I'm a back end developer. The front end, I'm a front end developer. And the data, right? I'm a database developer, whatever you want. And so we can split, we can have larger teams. As an example, I know it's crazy. We can have different kinds of teams that are focused on one layer of the MVC paradigm, right? So, or the pattern that we're using. So we can have people that just work on the front end. So they're designers and, front end developers, right? We have people on the back end developers and programmers, people that deal with things like the server and that kind of stuff. And then we have database, administrators and back end developers that work on kind of part of the back end relating to the database, and they also administer the database as well. So separation of concerns, and you can have more even finer grain, separation or process, so that there's even other separations. Example, with the front end, you can have a person who's more of a designer type that comes up with the design of the website and all the stuff that we talked about before. Breaking it down, doing layouts, which is the progressive enhancement, the content, and all that kind of stuff, the really important stuff. And then, a JavaScript front-end developer and so on, right? So lots of stuff like that we can do. And this pattern, if you will, the model view controller pattern or paradigm is the thing that allows us to do that. We can further look at it in terms of this way, where we see our user, the user basically sees the view, and when they interact with the view, the controller triggers some kind of actions. Maybe that changes, makes changes to the model or through the model to the data, because the data store is way over here in the back. And then the data gets returned into the model. The model, communicates with the controller, which further tells the model to update the view. And then the view has been updated, which means the page gets updated with new information that's shown to the user. Okay. And this idea is we're still doing a round trip, but the round trip is going through a couple of different layers before it comes back out. So again, over the last 25 years, solution stacks or technology stacks have been the way things have been working. And the most popular solution stack out there right now is the AMP stack, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And I would still say that the AMP stack, as an example, is probably still around, if I'm not wrong from what I saw, 70% of market share. 70%. That there's 70% of our websites out there are still Apache, MySQL, and PHP. The other 30% are made up of Node.js, the .NET stack, so that's IIS, C#, and .NET Core, that kind of stuff, as well as Node.js and some kind of mean, MERN, or Maven stack on the other end, all right? So, and there's reasons for this. I would say Node.js is quickly becoming the biggest chunk of that 30%. So Cooper's asking, is that 70% declining? It is. It's coming down more and more, but I think it's still around 70. It used to be 100%. Everything was AMP pretty much, and a very small portion, maybe like, or 95%, and the other 5% was like .NET and Java and Python and something else on the back end. Even though you guys are learning about Java EE at enterprise, right? That's usually used in large enterprise, but there's a lot more websites that are not using enterprise, kind of on the front, on the back end, right? So again, that's why the 70% to 30% ratio and what each of those things are. Again, this is approximate numbers. Every year, then the 70% of Apache, MySQL, and PHP sites continue to decline, and we'll talk about reasons why. So mean is interesting, and we talked about mean in different ways. It's made up of each letter represents kind of a different part of the solution stack. MongoDB database, Express is middleware. A lot of times these are part of it. These three for sure, Mongo, Express, and Node are there, and we just replace Angular with something like React or Vue or even Svelte or something else on the back end. Okay, on the front end. This is the front end framework. One advantage of using something like the mean stack or MERN stack or Nvm stack is it uses a single language throughout the application. So JavaScript is everywhere, right? That's the idea. So it reduces things like, well, you have to know Apache, right? And well, you also have to know MySQL query language, right? Oh, well, you also have to know PHP plus JavaScript plus CSS plus HTML and so on and so on. There's a lot to know, right, with the AMP stack, and there's less to know when it comes to the types of languages you're dealing with. Everything is very JavaScript-like in the mean, MERN, Nvm kind of world, right? Let's talk about NPM a little bit. We've been using NPM from the beginning to install modules. NPM is very modular in general. One thing I want to mention is that with our Node application framework, I'm just bringing up our administrative command line here. And for Node, if I do a Node -- version, you're going to see that my Node version is 17.71. And it didn't used to be that. This is something that has happened over the last little while. I've been avoiding, using something called the Node Version Manager for a while now. It's been out for a while. And what NVM does is if I look at Node NPM, you can see that my NPM version is 8.52. My Node version is 17.71. You might have something like 17.3 something. Okay. So why did I move on? I said that I wasn't going to. Well, I had some issues, right, with our application. And one of those issues in ICE 8, if you recall, was in my TS configuration. People had this issue with the target. They're like, no matter what I do, my target remains at ES 2022 or 2021. It won't support 2022. And I didn't have that problem until I got home. And then I had the same problem as you guys. I was like, wait, maybe I have to update my, let's check for updates for Visual Studio Code. And there was no updates. And I'm like, what's happening here? And then I checked TypeScript. So I went up to here and I said, let's check TypeScript, TSC -V. And my TypeScript was not 4.62, but rather it was something like 4.05 or 4.06. I was like, what? I updated TypeScript with everybody in the class last time. Yes, I did. But I've been doing this for a while, and Node has been evolving. And what's happened with Node, just a quick note about this, is that, the installation process has changed. So I have some remnants, that's what I had in my code, where I had on the back end a Node installation that was in one spot that was being kind of referred to by my path variable. And I had a new installation of Node in another spot. And so my previous installation of Node, which included older versions, okay, so things like, a version of the TypeScript that was like 4 point something, and another version of NPM that was like 7 point something, were being referenced rather than my new version. So come to the rescue with something called NVM for Windows. Okay, so I'm going to give you this little thing. And I'm going to talk about it, but you don't have to upgrade. For those people who I've been talking today, I've kind of talked about this, that NVM is an option. And NVM is available both on Mac and Linux as well. This is just a port for Windows. That's what it is. But NVM is its own thing. And these fine folks have come up with a release that makes sense. You can download and install NVM. And what it does for you is it allows you to switch between one version of Node and another. Okay, as an example. So Cooper says, should I be following 17? Is everything working for you, Cooper? That's what I have to ask you first.
I see it works fine for me.
So I recommend do nothing. Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah. I'm just mentioning this if you guys have problems, right? So if you don't have problems, then I would recommend don't do it. But if you have problems like me, I had to do it. And when I type in NVM now, you can see that I have a list of things that I can do. In fact, what I can do is NVM list. And if I do my NVM list, I can see that I'm currently using Node version of 17.71. I can select the version that I want. I can also do an NVM install and an NVM uninstall. So what you have to do to use NVM is remove your current version of Node. So completely uninstall Node from scratch. Make sure that all references to Node are gone. Clean it up, and then use NVM and reinstall Node through NVM, right? As opposed to through the download site. Because typically what we do is with Node, we go to nodejs.org, right? And then we just download the latest version. We just go here and download the version. But the problem with this is if we download this version, so 17.71, problem with this is, well, what if I'm supporting multiple clients? What do I do then, right? So if I'm supporting multiple clients, that is a problem because then, well, maybe I have to run the long-term support version as well. How do I run the long-term support version? And how do I switch between the long-term support version and the latest and greatest version? How do I do that, right? Because maybe a lot of clients want to use the LTS version because it's more stable, right? That's fair. And or what if I'm working with an older version of Node because I'm doing a website update? I'm not making, it's not a greenfield project. It's not something that I'm doing from scratch. A lot of times we're usually modifying, we're doing website modifications and updating or upgrading, right? So I may have to use an earlier version of Node than this. I can't install multiple versions of Node. It's not possible, right? Well, with NVM, it is. Onur says, my settings are the same as well, and it is working perfectly. Keep it the same then. So that's interesting. NVM is interesting. So how do I deal with it? What if I wanted to install the long-term support version, 16.14.1? How do I do that? I've left it for you to see it. I would just do an NVM install. And again, it's 16. And by the way, I think it's LTS, if I'm not wrong. If I just do LTS, then I think it'll just install it. That's how beautiful it is. Take a look at that, right? And then what I can do is if I do an NVM list, you can see that I have both. And I can quickly switch to 16.14.1 by doing NVM use, and I can go 16.14.1. And then if I do that, oh yeah, I got to do that in my, I got to do this because I'm already using, I'm using 17.71 because I have my beautiful Visual Studio Code open, and that would break it, right? So, but that's how easy it is. It's just you literally switch over, and it's nice, right? And if I want to remove it, NVM uninstall 16.14.1, then it's just gone, right? That's how easy it is, and that's why going forward, I think I'm going to do it this way for everybody. So NVM list, and you can see there's only one. So that's how you get NPM and Node. I recommend NVM nowadays as opposed to Node.js from earlier this semester. And I'm mentioning that because NPM is going to be used to get new packages and modules for our application framework. So what about Node? So Node, again, remember we talked about this. It was created way back in 2009, 2008. This guy Ryan Dahl was working on it, and so on. And they were looking at, Ajax, right? And how Ajax was able to use non-blocking code to access files, right? And one of the problems that they wanted to solve was this problem of supporting two-way communication between the browser and the server. They couldn't solve with the current structure that they had. So along came Google's V8 engine in 2008, which was the basics for what they did, and they developed Node.js off of it. Node.js supports something called non-blocking sockets, right? And Node.js was written in solid C. And of course, one thing that it made with Node.js was it made it completely modular and scalable, which is pretty awesome. But coming around the development team that was working with Node.js, a bit of history. Around the end of 2014, there was a conflict of philosophy, I would say, between the people who worked with the owned Node at the time, and the contributors to the project, and there was just a conflict of philosophies. They split off and they created their own project called io.js. And for a long time, after 2015, around the same time that Ecmascript 6 came out, there was a very small development, very slow development of Node. So an example, right now we're sitting at version 17 point whatever, right? Back then in 2015, we're talking about 7 years ago now, we were at version 0.12, version 0.13. That's how slow it went. 0.01. It was crazy. And then suddenly when they got back together, right, as an example, and they got back together after that time, they fixed up the issues. They had a steering committee that came back and they formed the Node Foundation, and they created, they kind of came together and they upgraded nodes, and wow, what a difference. They went from 0 point something to version 4. Like, that's how fast they went. And ever since that time, which happened in, I would guess in 2016 timeframe, it's been racing. It's every year, it's like, you've got 1 or 2 releases a year, which is crazy. It's really, really quick, right? So that's what's happened with Node. The reason also that we use Node is because of JavaScript's event-driven, framework, right? Remember, JavaScript is an event-driven language. We talked about this before, and it's able to execute asynchronous code. Typically, when we see average JavaScript developers, they only think about the DOM, the document object model. And I told you guys when we first started doing this that the document object model was like level 1 in terms of JavaScript knowledge, right? And you guys should know this by now, as you've been kind of ramping up with the stuff, your skills, the stuff that you've been using lately. One thing that we also realized, the browser is a single-threaded environment. So there can only be one process or thread that the browser runs at the same time. So because JavaScript and Node.js was based off this Google V8 engine idea, so too would it have a single-threaded and kind of execution, right? And what it did was it used this event loop idea that we've talked about before. So when we have events happen in JavaScript, the way it works is we have an event listener or an emitter, and that gets added into the event queue, right? And then we have an event handler that waits, as an example, for an event to trigger in the event queue. The event loop notifies the event handlers that something has happened, and then the event handler can take some action, okay? This same idea, right, this event loop cycle is the same thing that happens in the back end for Node.js. So again, Node.js works on a single thread, if you will, a single thread. All right, so let's take a look at this. So here's an example of something that is blocking. All right, so here's some PHP. You have a variable, and the variable basically says, hey, I want my SQL query to go out to the database, and I want to select all the users from the users table. That's what this is, right? And maybe if it's a small table, it might come back pretty quick. But what if it's a large table, like 100,000 users, right? Let's say you have a small social media site, or a very popular site with a lot of users. And I want to get the entire user table out, and I want to display it somehow. So maybe I'm an admin. Guys, this is a blocking, kind of a request. And this blocking code but that's how PHP works, right? As an example, it blocks the operation of any other code, which means your website is going to hang for a bit until it gets all the data from the table, right? And this idea of querying the database and waiting is antiquated. What ends up happening is you have your process that is, in what we call a thread, that is just like sitting there idle, waiting for this thing to respond, right, from the server. And of course, they fix that by adding a thread pool or creating something called multi-threading. And for a long time, people thought that was, the next best thing. It's amazing. We have a multi-threaded environment and blah, blah, blah. And PHP was touting that it was amazing, right? But actually, multi-threading has a problem, especially on the server. One problem is that managing those threads, or the overhead of managing all those threads, is a complex task that takes a lot of memory. And system resources is always being wasted by waiting for all those tasks, that are idle, because there's a lot of idle threads just sitting there. Why? I need more than one thread. At one thread, one user. I have 3,000 users. I have 3,000 threads, because there's only one operation I can do for one user at a time, right? That's how it works. So think about that now. If I have a very popular site, let's say I'm someone like, Cooper or Deontay or Devin or Eden or Emin or Anithasan or Anur or Will, not, your boring professor, but one of you guys that are really popular out there. And you start off a fantastic website that's really well received, and you have 100,000 users active at the same time on your website. Something that's interesting that you're doing or whatever. Maybe you have videos or something else, some other content that you're delivering on that website, or maybe that website links to other websites and you have a really popular site. That means you need 100,000, there you go, Wordle, 100,000 or more threads if you're running on a PHP site, right? 100,000. Each thread takes a little bit of memory. And what happens if everyone's on at the same time? It's a really busy period. Well, you might get something like slowdowns happening. And what happens when there's a lull? There's not much business at all. You have a lot of these threads just sitting there taking up memory and waiting. Doesn't make any sense, right? So scaling is really hard with this kind of stuff as well. You can't throttle up and throttle down so easily. I mean, nowadays they've made some improvements. They've worked on PHP. They've worked on Apache, and the Apache project continues to evolve. So I'm not going to tell you that it's as bad as it used to be. It's still bad, and we'll talk about why. Okay. Take a look at this. So here's an example of, and it's a bit old. This diagram's a bit old, but I want you to take a look at this for a second. So we have Nginx, which is kind of a server that runs Node. Okay, and Apache, the thing that's running PHP. So take a look at the blue line. The blue line is, kind of here, the number of requests per second. And you can see that as the number of concurrent connections, users, right, improve, you can see that the amount of requests per second that the Apache server can handle are less and less. It takes a lot of CPU time, right, to do all those executions at the same time. We're only talking about 3,500 users, and it drops off, dramatically, right? I'm not even talking about a 100,000 user site, okay? But take a look at Nginx, how it performs. It drops off a bit, right? As an example, but it keeps on steadily inside of the 9,000 requests per second in this particular example for the foreseeable future. It's really slowly declining, right, in terms of performance. Here's the worst one, though, all right? So as the number of concurrent connections increases, Apache continues to add more and more threads, which increases the amount of memory that's being used at once, right? Not only CPU time, but memory allocation. Whereas, take a look at beautiful Node. Node adds no additional memory. It has a single thread, and it runs that single thread forever, right? This, my friends, these two things, this slide here and this slide here, are the two reasons, right, that really are the justification for why switch to Node, right? Especially when you have users on the cloud. I create a VM, right, as an example, and I want to have multiple VMs, right, in a single box, virtual machines to serve multiple websites, as an example, and give them a slice of my performance, right? I can still have very, very good performance with node sites, but unfortunately with, the CPU demands, if I slice part of a CPU time and give some slice to a VM that's running a PHP server, yeah, good luck. It's especially if it gets busy like this, it can't work. But for small little sites, as an example, I can have many of them, and they're not going to take up more memory or even a lot more CPU time compared to, let's say, something like PHP. PHP has other issues as well, like security problems, and it has other things in terms of the language itself, which is very unstructured. Now, there are frameworks around to make it better, and one of the best frameworks out there that was out for PHP for a long time is something like Laravel, right? So Laravel is a nice PHP framework, right? So I got to be honest, we got to talk about apples to apples, okay? We can't just rang on PHP and say that it's terrible, okay? Again, it's 70% of our code base, and again, PHP is out there, so why not kind of run something that makes sense? So this is PHP. So Laravel is probably, like, I would say, the best framework out there that I know of that runs PHP very nicely, okay? But still, even with Laravel and other frameworks just like it that provide more support and everything for PHP, the evidence shows, it points to this phenomena, this thing that's still happening on the Apache side, right? And so it makes it so it's much more attractive to run Node.js, going forward. The problem is, how do we convert all those grandfathered sites, the legacy sites that are out there, that are they're already deep with a lot of PHP code. The sites that are running things like WordPress, right? WordPress requires PHP, Apache, as an example, and some kind of backend database like MySQL or Postgres. WordPress is probably the most popular low code, no code content management system out there, right? Where if you're a designer or someone who doesn't know a lot of code and you still want to pull off a really nice site, you can start off a WordPress site, as long as your developer, or a lot of times it's just your provider, provides you with a WordPress kind of template to start with. You can quickly kick off a website that's really nice looking and robust in about 5 minutes. Okay. The problem with WordPress, because it's running on PHP and Apache on the back end and MySQL, all things, different languages and stuff like that are wrapped together. Even the most modern version of WordPress is, well, it has 800 files at minimum to get you guys going. 800. That's a lot. How much do we use? We didn't use 800 files, right? And if I was going to add, for every page that you add, it doesn't just add one file, it adds several, right? Because the way WordPress works is it's a generic website kind of construction. It's a content management system. It allows a user to have a dashboard that they can go in and modify the content on their own without the need for a designer or developer. Once it's going, users can go in and add functionality, pull in plugins, do all kinds of stuff at the cost of two things: thousands of files later on and a performance hit. Why? Because over time, you're going to have this. As users and the number of users that you attract go up, and hopefully you will attract more than 1,000 users, right, with your popular site, the memory demands are going to go up for your site. And at the same time, the number of concurrent users are going to drive down performance, right, of your, pretty drastically at the beginning, actually, for the first 1,000 users or so, right? Drop down performance like 50% of what you normally would be expecting. And this is a rough estimate. Even if it was 20%, it doesn't really matter. It's going to drive down performance simply because of the platform that it's on. So that's why 70% is the number, because there's so many sites out there that still use Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And I'm telling you this story because we're moving on and we're going to be using Node.js. And you guys are going to have the knowledge, the kind of the latest, solution stack knowledge. And because you've learned, if I'm not wrong, PHP and other, kind of solution stacks in other courses, this course complements your knowledge and brings you up to date. That's the idea behind it. All right, so what are common JS modules? So we talked about, hey, I have this this JavaScript stuff, and I want to run it on the back end. Well, if I'm running JavaScript on the back end and the server is communicating with JavaScript, there's no middleman anymore. There's no index.html. Nothing links together or, stitches our JavaScript together anymore. It doesn't exist, right? We need to have another way of connecting modules together. And from now on, we're going to be talking about JavaScript files on the back end as modules for the most part. Okay. So the way to do that is to use something called the CommonJS pattern. Okay, this is one way of doing it. We're going to start with CommonJS, and then we're going to go into Ecmascript 6 structure as well. So the way CommonJS works is we use the require keyword typically, and the require keyword is a method that links modules together. They kind of allow you to inject information from one module into another one. Okay. In order for us to do that, each module has to use the exports keyword in order for us to, kind of expose parts of your code out from one file to another file. And the module itself, right, if you think about it, this exports keyword, what it does is it creates a container that contains all of the data that you want to export. The exports container. Okay. How does it look? It looks like something like this, right? Where we have our, let's say, something like a const message, hello, and then we use module.exports. Once I use this, my file becomes a module when it comes to with respect to Node.js. And then we can say, well, the say hello property, and by the way, module.exports doesn't have a say hello property. When we assign it, we create it in JavaScript, and so too it happens here. Say hello, module.exports say hello is equal to this function, this anonymous function. What's happening is a reference to this function, a pointer, is being stored inside of this say hello property. And that's what happens. And because we're using the module exports, that means say hello, this function say hello, is now going to be available outside of the hello.js file. Okay, hear me out. I'm going to go slow here because people get confused with this all the time. So what about here? I'm in server.js now. So in server.js, of course, I want to incorporate the stuff that I have in that hello.js file into my file. How do I do that? Const hello is equal to require. I use the require keyword, and I call the hello.js file. Notice that there is no .js extension. Okay? Because require assumes that you're going to load a .js file. Okay, so hello then, what is hello? Hello is a pointer to the object that is represented by my module.exports. So this object, right, has a say hello function inside of it. It's a property that points to a function, which means that if I call hello, which represents the object, because I'm using the require keyword, then hello.sayHello is accessing the property that is that we declared in the hello.js file. Whew. Are you with me? Do you get it? How it works, how we stitch things together. We use a server.js, and then we use the require keyword to link the data that we have from one file into another. Main's good, Cooper's good. Anyone else? Again, I think it's, thank you, Will. I think it's important that we understand. Eden, you think you got it? Okay, good. Well, let's try it and we'll see. It seems a little overkill. Well, you'll see we're gonna overkill it even more, Cooper. All right, so this is cool. So this is the first part, but what about, let's make it different. So what about this message? Is this available? What do you guys think? Can I make this a message available somehow? Is it available right now inside of my server.js? If this is my server.js, these two lines, how about this? Is this available? Const message. We are importing the entire file, right? So no, it's not that. It's just not part of the exports object. right? So the exports object, module.exports, does not include a reference to message. And therefore, we consider this private to the hello.js file, right? It's not exposed, which means it's not available here in the server.js. Another way to write our hello.js is something that looks like this, where module.exports is directly equaling to, or we're assigning the exports object to point to the function itself. Okay, this is another way to do it. And when we assign the exports object to point to the function, then the exports object acts like the function, which means that when I do const hello is equal to require dot hello, now I can just call, I can use hello, this variable here, this const, as a function. So instead of doing it hello.sayHello, there is no say hello anymore because we didn't mention a friendly name for this anonymous function. The exports package or the exports object, the exports container, I'm using different words to represent the same thing, it points to this anonymous function, which means we can treat this hello variable as a function and call it as a function because it's pointing to this function. Okay, so there's two ways we can do it here. All right, so let's add this function in a second. Now, how about Node.js core modules? So we can certainly declare files, we can import new modules, but Node.js comes with a core set of modules that are bound inside of its binary file, right? So they're compiled in there. They're pre-bundled, call them what you want, and includes things like file system, HTTP, HTTPS, and a bunch of other ones, tons of other ones. And all we need to do is use the require method to call them. We don't treat them as files. They just get called in a way like this. We can say that const fs represents the file system, requires fs. Fs would not then be available in your file structure. You wouldn't see this. Whereas if I was using this, hello.js would have to exist in your files for me to load it, right? But because the file system is pre-bundled with Node, we just have to call it. We just have to require it. Once I require it, it's inside of my code. So the question is, of course, I always ask this question, why not just require all pre-bundled modules? And the answer for most Node.js developers is, well, you don't need everything. And if you don't need all the modules, why increase the memory footprint of your application by including everything? It goes against the philosophy of how Node should work. Node should give you the bare bones stuff that you need to create a server, and then you can add additional modules on top of it in order for you to develop really cool things. So that's how it works. So I only require the built-in modules that I want, and file system is the one we're going to use today as an example. Okay, so this is what I want to do, and let's go into it and do it now. I think we've talked enough, and let's get to doing. All right, so here we are, and I've pulled in our, kind of section 3, and we want to make a copy from ICE 8 to ICE 9. Let's make a new one. And I want to grab everything from here except for node modules and drop it into ICE 9. There it is. And then I want to take ICE 9 and drag that into Visual Studio Code. Awesome. The next thing I want to do is I want to, let's add a PowerShell. By the way, one thing to note is this. Some people have sent me comments on like, how do I change? You always seem to have PowerShell on here. How do I change this, the PowerShell stuff, or my command line so it opens up PowerShell by default? Well, if you look here, you can see that you can configure your terminal settings right here, right? I can call PowerShell or anything else I want in here. Well, let's configure our terminal settings and see how this works. So again, it talks about the terminal, right, as an example. And if you scroll down, it gives you information about how everything works, the size of your font and all that kind of stuff, and a bunch of other things that are in here, okay? And it says, when opening a file from the Explorer in terminal, determines what kind of terminal will be launched. It says integrated. I could use external, right? And if I did external, it's going to ask me what type, what file is going to be used, right? And if in the external link, what am I using? I can certainly configure these things. Let's go back to integrated. And if I click on my terminal, I can reset or I configure my setting, right? I'm just letting you know that this is where you can make your settings change. So you don't have to use the integrated terminal. You can use something else. And it says terminal external Windows executable is command. But what if I wanted to use PowerShell? Then I can certainly change this here to PowerShell. Okay, so that's where you make your changes. For now, I'm just going to leave it at that and call PowerShell, right? And by the way, you can also select default profile. So if I went to PowerShell, right? And if I select my default profile, I can select it up here. I can say PowerShell is my default, right? So just in case you change that, and you can delete these now and go back. And then if I start it off, it starts off as PowerShell. Okay, so people who need it. All right. So here is my PowerShell. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yarn install. Again, I'm giving you a chance to catch up too. There we are. And when I do yarn install, you can see our package.json has ICE7 in here. I forgot last week to change it. Let's change this to ICE9. And our README file probably still says ICE6. Oh my God. Let's change this to ICE9 as well. We're really behind the 8 ball here, right? And let's put this up on GitHub. So we'll say clear git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for in-class exercise 9, right? Which is what we want to do. Okay, git push. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we're going to git pull first. Git stash. Sorry, git pull. Sorry I had to do that, but I had to do this because, sorry, this means that this will be back to those ICE7 again. I apologize, but we worked on my laptop the last time, and the last thing is I want is for this to be wrong. Yeah, because otherwise that would be bad. So let's try this again. Git push. Good. So if you notice what I did, I stashed my changes. If I made some changes, I stashed them, which means I ignored them. And then I put them up. I just pulled from GitHub first. All right. You know what I wonder? I wonder if I got all the changes from my app.ts here from last week. I don't think I did. You know what, guys? I'm sorry. Now that I saw that, it makes me nervous. So one sec, guys, one sec. We'll fix this problem. So let's just delete all this again. So sorry. Yeah, I'm deleting this, and I'm gonna go back into grab my in-class exercise 8. One sec. It's my bad. Dates. Oh, sorry. Don't want that one. Keyboard. Okay, so it did work. Okay, good. Yeah. Sorry, guys. And yarn install. Yeah, see? Now it looks better. My app.js. Right? Because I got my TS here and I don't got old files. That would be bad. All right, good. Okay, let's do that again. So clear git a dot git commit -m, and we'll say updated project files again. Excellent. Awesome. Now it's fixed. Okay. Woohoo. So now that I've got this, let's add a couple of files. And the first one I want to add in is a new file, which is my server.js. A lot of times there's two files that we normally use, two file conventions. One of them is either server.js or index.js, one or the other. Okay. So I'm going to start with server.js, and server.js is where everything is going to happen. All the fun is going to happen here. Did I have to change this package.json? I did. Damn. Let's change this up again. Yeah, because what happens when you grab stuff from online, then good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people too. All right, so there we go. Talking to myself. So now that we've got this, I've added a server.js that's empty, and I was saying that server.js is kind of one of the conventional names that we use for our server. The other one is index.js. You're going to see a lot of those in the coming weeks. Let's add in our hello world. So new file, we're going to call this a hello.js. There it is. Okay, and then our hello.js, we'll do the same thing that we did last time, where in our hello.js we have some kind of message. Let's say instead of let, we'll say const. Our message is equal to, we'll say this is the hello message. Our hello message is equal to the hello world standard message. And then what we want to do is we want to have a function that is called something like say hello, right? And the say hello function is going to be a console log that is going to include hello message, right? Simple stuff. And now we have some options for exporting. Here's one of the options: module.exports. Module.exports, and we can say module.exports dot say hello equal to say hello. Now, if you look at this, you're like, wait, what? How come it's the same name? This part belongs to the exports module, the exports container. This part refers to the function, right? They look the same because I've named them the same, but this is definitely a way to do that. We'll come back to show other ways, okay? So now that I've got this, how do I connect it to my server? I'm going to go back to my server.js and type in const hello is equal to require dot slash hello and Node.js. There's no JS at the end, okay? And then we can just simply say hello dot say hello. And to test this, we can just pull up our terminal and we can say node, call the node, kind of binary, node, and then the name of our file, server.js. And we'll see that we get hello world. Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me, X if you're not, or you don't understand. Even if you're with me and you don't understand, put an X, please. I prefer that, so then I can answer your questions. Okay, Eden, talk to me. I want to help you. And I'm okay. I'm glad that you were honest, because I know some people put check mark and they didn't understand. So what is it you don't understand? Yeah.
I think I know what's wrong. I put 3 L's instead of it. Sorry, just
okay. But how about this?
No,
forget the syntax. Do you understand the idea behind this? Are you okay with from a understanding perspective?
Oh no, I didn't say that. I think so.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
We'll get back to you. I'm gonna see how you do, and if you're good, we'll get back to you and we'll go through that.
Okay.
All right. All right then. So now that we've got this part, this is nice, and there's different options for our exporting. We can export this way, right? This is one. We also said that we can export a different way. So we can say module.exports is equal to, or module.exports, well, what if I just said the whole thing is equal to this, right? Is that okay? Can I do this? Or will this cause an error? Notice how it like lit up? Let's see how that works. If I go node server, it says, nope, don't know what you mean now, because hello, say hello is not a function anymore. Why? Well, there is no say hello function in the exports, keyword anymore, right? It doesn't include that. It's almost like I got to say hello, almost. This should looks like it might work. Okay. So again, going back here, again, clear and node server, and now we're okay again, because that's what we did. We said that, the whole object is pointing to this thing. That's what we're saying, right? So we're saying that this thing is pointing to this, and this keyword is actually pointing to this. And so what's happening is that the exports object, which is basically just an empty container, is now has this thing, says hello, inside of it. That's what it is, right? But instead of say hello being inside of it, this whole thing, this container is, well, that is the thing. This whole container is the says hello function, and that's all it is. That's what this means, okay? So could we do it this way? Yes. And if you only had one function, it's totally fine to do it like this. Here's another way of doing it. If you don't want to do it this way, what about if I said, I want to make exports, right, an object, and I do this, right? And I could, right? I could make this an object. And now this exports object, if I go back and do it again, it's going to give me another error. It's going to say, hello is not a function anymore, right? And by the way, notice that this stuff down here, what it's doing. This is the call stack. Whenever we get errors like this, don't panic. You're going to get errors like this all the time when running Node.js. This means, okay, hello is not a function, and it tells me where the problem is. We're looking at server.js, line 3. Let's take a look. Server.js, line 3, hello is not a function. How does it work now? Hello dot say hello, right? So that's how it works there too, right? So if I go back up and try it again, right, now it works again. Okay, interesting. I like it. It's good, right? Well, that means that, and it'd be really nice, we're getting some good support here, but a lot of times what we want is some better support than this. Wouldn't it be nice if we had better support? We can get better support by going into our package.json, and we can add in a new piece of support. We can say yarn add @types /node -- dev. And that gives us Node.js support, TypeScript support, right? So that's definitely something we want. So again, the command is yarn add @types /node -- dev. I'm putting it into the chat. Okay. So now when we do this, let's close this off. If I go back here, you're going to get a pile of more support than before. Take a look at that, right? See? More support, more support. Take a look at that, right? And that's what we want. We want to have good support, solid support for our stuff we do in Node. Same thing here with our hello. The exports module is a module. You can see that that's what it is. That's what it returns, a module. Says hello is a function that returns void, okay? Awesome. What's another way to do it this way? Well, we could, what if I had another function? Let's suppose I had, instead of a hello message that was hello world, what if I had a goodbye message? And the goodbye message says goodbye. Goodbye, right? And I want to make another function that was say goodbye, right? They say goodbye, and then we can have the goodbye message in here instead of the hello message. And how would I export it out here? What do you think I could do if I wanted to export both? There's a bunch of options. So this is another option. We could What are you guys thinking about this first before I do it?
Maybe just put the goodbye in right below, say hello.
With a comma.
Comma.
So yeah, so say
Comma.
goodbye, say goodbye, and once we do that, because this is an object, now say goodbye is also available, right? So if I go back to server.js, then I can just simply say hello.say goodbye, and then you can see that if I run it, then I'm going to get both hello world and goodbye. Okay, so I got both of those two things. Awesome. What's another way to write this? I want to talk about different ways because you guys are going to see different ways of this being written. So another way to do it is directly in here. So I could say something like, let's grab these two functions and put them inside of here. And then let's restructure. So we're going to say that say hello is a function, right? And we're going to put a comma here. And we can say that say goodbye is a function as well. And that is going to be inside of the module.exports. Let's clean this up so it looks nice. So we're going to right click and go to format selection, and it kind of looks like this. This is also another way of doing the same thing, where we have a friendly name, say hello, for an anonymous function. A friendly name for an anonymous function. This is very common as well. Save. And test it out. Let's test it out. You can see it works as well. Questions around this? What if I wanted to expose hello message and goodbye message? Is there a way of doing that too? What do you think I could do here? I'm going slow because I want you guys to get understanding, right? Not because I'm teasing you or anything like that. So what do I do here if I want to have the hello message and goodbye message available down here? What do I do? Okay, I'm going to ask Eden.
As well as having them in the module exports.
Yes, I was going to add Eden, but okay. I haven't added an extra comma, but thank you for that. Hello message, it's okay. And I could do goodbye message, right? Here's hello and goodbye. Eden, not for any other reason, just because I want to make sure you get it. So in server, then I can just say something like console log, let's try hello message, hello message. You can see that that comes up. And when I run it now, then we can get both, right? So we can do that as well. I can expose whatever I want, right? By putting it as part of the module.exports object. I can do that too. Cool. And when I don't have it in there, let's suppose I take it out and I still left it in, right? So in my server.js, if I try and access something that's not available, right, then it's going to give me undefined. And we see a lot of undefineds happening a lot. If you see undefined, it means there's something you're trying to access that's not available or that you've made unavailable. That's undefined. Okay, so that's no good. And the other way to do it, let's do another way. I'm just going to show you different ways. So this is definitely one way. We're just going to comment this one out because I like this one, but there's other ways to do it as well. The other way to do it is to actually do something that looks like this. I can say module.exports is equal to, right? And we can say say hello is equal to this, right? So that's one way to do it, right? And then we can go module.exports say goodbye is equal to this. That's also viable. So you can have multiple module.exports lines also being something that you say. So this is sometimes what we prefer to do as well. Okay. Again, now if I go back to that, could you make an array, a function array? You could make a function array if you want to. You can also make a message array. It'll store whatever you want it to, right? But this idea where we can kind of add to the exports container more than one thing, we can do that because remember, the exports container is simply that. It's a container, right? And I can add in whatever things I want in there and whatever things I add get exported out, right, from the module, so it can be consumed by whoever's calling the module. Okay, that's the idea behind it. Okay. So again, it really depends. I'm not going to do it this way. I'm just going to do it the other way that I mentioned, which is this way. Okay, for now. All right, cool. I like it. And we have our hello.js, and it works, like we said before. And let's go back and put this up on GitHub. Now, again, this is not part of your in-class exercise 9. It's practice, but I want to upload to GitHub anyway. So say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added hello.js. And sounds like a delegation. It kind of is. Kind of is delegation. But I also want to think about this, not just delegation, but creating an alias or we're creating an object here. The exports object is the module. This is what's contained in the module. Anything outside the module, like up here, this is private. It's not exposed. Right? So now I want to add in some code, right? So I can read, and I want to use a built-in module. So we're going to call this file system. File system is going to require the file system module. Okay. Notice that this is a different color, right? It's green, and these ones are blue, right? Whereas if I go back to the hello.js, you can see that these ones are white, right? So this dark green, what it means is it's a built-in, right? That's what it means. And what I want to do here is I want to kind of call a module, and it's going to look like this. I'm going to say, hey, file system, I want you to read file, and read file. I'm getting some really cool code hinting on this. It says there's 8 different overloads. So 8 different methods that they can use with this. This is the first one. And the first part is the file system path or file descriptor. So let's go into put in the path, which is going to be /. I want to look at the data path. I want to look at my users module, this JSON file. I want to load this one, and I want to spit it out to the console. Let's do that. So the way it would be is ./data/users.json. Now you have to put in the full path because it's a file read operation, right? Followed by, let's see what it says, a callback in this particular overload. It's not complete yet, but look what the callback wants. The callback, which is just a function, needs 2 parameters. 1, an error parameter, and 2, a data parameter. Let's do that. So function, I want to take an error parameter and a data parameter, and I want to return out my data. So I want to say something like, if there's an error, then I want to do a console.error, and I want to print out the error.message, right? Whatever that error is. If there's not an error, then I want to do a console log, right, of the data. That's what I want to do. Okay. Using the file system read file method, I'm loading up data.json, users.json from the data folder, and I'm using this function as a callback function, which is required, right, for me to load it up. Okay, let's see how this looks. So if I go here and I go node server.js, then I get this, a big byte array of data. Why? Because if I look at the read file, it says it returns void, right? But my data is a buffer. That's what it is. A buffer is another name for an array of binary data. That's what I'm getting out. Okay. So it takes my JSON data and converts it to binary. All right, well, I don't want that. And there's another option here in the read file where you can decide the format. I want it to be UTF-8, right? So that's another format. And now, again, my data is a buffer, but now it became a string suddenly. Take a look at that. My data became a string because I used UTF-8. Otherwise, it was just a buffer of data. Okay, so we know that data is a string. We can print it out now. And let's save, and there we go. There's our data, right? And notice what we get is we have this. We have hello world, goodbye world, and then we have our data. But wait a minute, didn't we do it this way first? Didn't we want to spit out our data first and then say hello and then say goodbye? What's happening here? How come I'm getting my data later when I'm requesting it first? What's the problem here? Hint, hint. Line 1. Nope, that's not the error. What's the problem? Why am I getting my read file first?
Is it due to the console log or something? Asynchronous?
Yeah, there you go. It's the asynchronous nature of JavaScript.
Yeah.
I gotta say that to you
got it
guys like
right.
a million times this semester, right? I don't think maybe a million's too many, but asynchronous nature of JavaScript. Why? Because it doesn't matter even where I put this or how I position these files, because at the end of the day, if you look at it, I'm doing a file system read. Anytime I use a file system read or a URL read or some kind of data fetch, I don't know when the heck I'm going to get it. I have no idea. It really depends on the server. It depends on many factors. We can never guarantee the time frame. So I cannot, it doesn't matter the order. Okay, well, we want to fix this problem. But before we fix it, I want to put this into a separate file because it really doesn't belong here like this, right? I want to call some kind of README, a file that is read, right? Let's make a new file. So I'm going to call this file usersdata.js. Okay, usersdata.js. And I'm going to just port over or cut paste from my server. I'm going to cut this piece out, cut it, and go into my users.data and paste it. And I'm going to go into my server and grab this part, cut it, and go into my users.data and underneath this and paste it. And that's okay. And this is okay. Awesome. And now I'm going to require the file here. By the way, again, Eden, doesn't matter if I do it first. Let's do it first this time. So if I do const, and let's call this the users file, right? And I'm going to say that I'm going to require the ./users.data, right? That's what I want. Okay. And then what I can do is call users, right? But remember, users is not a module right now. It's not a module. Let's make users.data a module. How do I do that? Well, I want to return something. And there's a couple ways. I could do something like this. I could say export module.exports is equal to this. Oh boy. I don't know is that going to work? Let's see. If I go to my server.js, I would have to do something like users. Does that look natural to you? Why do I have to do it this way? Eden, it didn't matter which order, right? Because users points to, sorry, I know I answered. Because users, the module exports, right? And I'm just going to draw it out for you again with my annotator, right? The module exports, this container points to this. That's what it points to. So that means when I export, that whole container is this part. That's all it is. That's all that's in the container. Nothing else, this piece right here. Which means exports is a reference, is a pointer to this whole output, whatever the output is, which is really just a function, right? Which means in order for me to call this function back inside of the code, right? If I go back into the code, which is over inside of server, right? Then users is actually already called, the function's already been called. If I want to make this users data a function, then I can encapsulate it. I can do something like, let's just do it over here, function, right? Where I do something like this and take this part, which is just a command, it's a single command, and I can put it inside that function. Now this, if I did this and I tried to run it, then it would say that it says hello world and goodbye world, but it doesn't do this because even if I include it, this function doesn't do anything. Take a look at that, right? this function was never called, right? So if I go back to my server and do this, it says, well, there's nothing going on. But if I call users as a function, right, then you can see now I'm going to get that data again, right? Because, again, going back to users.data, the function itself is what the exports is, right? Okay. Another way to write this, right? Another way to write this would be that we can make it a named function as well. For example, something like get data. So if I call this function get data, right? Get data, right? If I did this, so exports is equal to this function get data, then again, how would I call it? The exact same way. It wouldn't be, we wouldn't have the get data function because that's just the friendly name that's inside of this file, right? Get data doesn't move from this file outside of it. It just exists here. If I wanted get data to be part of this, then I would have to do something like this. Get data, right? And I could leave it like this, or I can just say something like this. So I could say that module exports get data is equal to this anonymous function. And then in my server, I wouldn't be able to do this anymore. It would be users.getData. And by the way, this makes the most sense. Users, get data from the users. Okay. And if I go back, and if I try it again, then you're going to see the same data come up. But again, we have this problem. We haven't solved our problem, right? We've added our file, which is users.data. Let's add that into our GitHub. Added users.data.js, git push. By the way, notice I used a weird users.data.js. You can do that. You can put as many dots in there as you want. And you do that for clarity more than anything else. All right, excellent. That's nice. That's very nice. So here's my users.data, and this is nice, but we still haven't solved our problem. I want to make it so that I want my data to come not here, but let's even do a further test. I want my data to kind of be in between here. This is where it would be the real challenge, right in here. How do I do that? Well, remember, data, it doesn't matter when I want it. It matters when it feels like loading. We need to wait for the data to load in order for me to do the rest. So how can this work? You don't want to use synchronous functions. So I want to go back out to that users.data.js, and I can use a little keyword called async, right? And what I can do is I can await for this thing to be completed, right? So this is the thing that I want to return, right? And if I do async await, right, then if I did this, and if I go and try it again, right, let's try and do that, it's going to go, well, the exact same way, no difference. This async await, it didn't do anything, right? It'd be nice if it did something, but it doesn't. What we want to use is something called promises, right? If you want to make this work. So what I can do is I can say const, and I can call this fs promise, right, is equal to that fs.promises, right? Let's just call this promises to make it the same. So promises is actually a part of the file system, which allows me to make this into a promise, right? And a promise has, I'm going to wait for this to happen, and then I'm going to do something else. It has the then keyword linked to it. So instead of using file system read file, let's use something like this alias, file system promises dot read file. And now that I'm using promises, right, if I hover over the function, it says I'm returning a promise that is actually void, right? Okay, that's not cool. That's actually wrong, actually. And let's see what happens when I do that. I get nothing now. I don't get anything at all. So it says, okay, well, you're making a promise, but you're really not delivering, Tom, right? So in order for me to deliver it, I have to return something, because right now it's returning void. So I'm going to return this whole statement. So I'm going to return, after I'm finished awaiting, I'm going to return for this whole thing to be done, all right? So what async await pattern does is it accesses the function async. I'm marking the function as an async function. I'm using await, the await keyword to say that I'm awaiting for this to return, and I'm making this into a promise to basically say, look, I promise I'm going to return some data here. Okay, that's what I'm making it say. So if I do that, I still get nothing, because even though I do this now, it says the function return type is a promise, and I'm either going to be returning, I'm actually returning both a buffer and a string. Okay, that's what I'm returning. That's my return type. Because if I look at here, if I go to read file, it says my return type, there's no return type for the read file. Read file is going to spit out something. But notice it says my promise, that's what it's going to return because I've marked it as an await. A promise, first of all, it's of type promise. So it's going to return a buffer and a string. Okay, cool. So how do I make it work on the server side? So on the server side now, I can modify the return type to say something that looks like this, where I say something like dot, then, so after I get the data, then I want to do something. I need to do it in terms of a callback function. And I'm going to get that data. And so what I want to do with that data after I got it is I want to do a console log. So let's console log it out. Okay, console log, which means that going back to my file, which is inside of my users.data here, and instead of doing it this way, I don't want to do this. I want to return my data. Okay. Oh boy. What does this mean? Right? Well, take a look. I'm returning my data out of this function, and the return is going to return out of this function, right? So this data is going to be returned out of here, right? It's going to come out. And then my data is going to return up here, and this return is going to return the data when it's done into the function. Woo, right? And then what's going to happen is my server, on the server side, I'm going to wait for the data to come. When it comes, then I'm going to use a little callback function to print it out to the log. And you're going to be like, wait, what have we saved here? We haven't saved anything yet. Wait for me, wait. Okay. And yay, there it is, right? But still in the wrong order. It actually happens last again. What? Why can't we fix it? Well, we can by taking these two things and by putting one here, and we can put the other one in here. And this is, my friends, the way to do it, because what we're doing is we're saying, hey, now that we have the data already here at this point, right? First, we get the data, then we have the data, then we output hello, we output the data, and then goodbye. Let's try that out. And there we go. There's hello, there's the data, there's goodbye. The other thing that's missing from this is a catch. And the catch gives us an error or rejection. There's a reason for the problem to fail, which usually is some kind of error. And the error, right, again, we'd have to catch it and kind of deal with it. So we'll do a console.error, or we'll say, error user data not returned. Okay. So that is the complete function. Questions around this? And what did I do here? Which is probably a new thing you've never seen before. We're using an async await type function. And the async await pattern, what it does is says, hey, we're marking this function as async, right? That's the first thing. The await pattern says, wait until I'm done getting data back before I return something. And the promises adds additional functionality where we say that not only am I going to wait for us to return something, but I promise that I'm going to return it. And when I mark this thing as a promise as opposed to a regular function, then when I go back into my server, I can use the then keyword to respond, almost like an event. So I wait for the event to trigger, and then I do something else. That's what the promise works like. I can also use a .catch. Now, typically we don't write it this way. We write it like this. Okay, we put the catch and the then on different lines, and we kind of tab it in a lot of times like this. That's typically how you might see it. Okay, let's save. And by the way, if you want to, you can always format it. If you don't believe me, you can go here and you can right click and you can go to format selection, and it's going to put it in the right order. Look, it even broke out the users. Okay, and the same thing goes with this. If you don't like this format, you can right click. Let's just actually do the whole thing. Right click and go format selection, and again, it'll format the selection the way it thinks is the right way to do it. And a lot of times it'll break the data down into different lines. I personally don't like this. I'm going to undo that. But this part I'm okay with. Let's put this up on GitHub. And we'll say added async await promise, to users data. Okay, so an async await pattern, right? And if you actually look at the, I'm sorry, Cooper. If you look at the async await pattern for JavaScript, let's take a quick peek at that before we finish off for the day. So if I look at the async await is basically promises, and it talks about how to use that. That is part of JavaScript, right? We haven't covered it yet, but that's what it does. So typically you have the then keyword that kind of covers that thing. So that is the way it would work. Once we have the then keyword, that's the promise. And the response is something that we're getting back from when we're fetching. So fetch is a way of doing it. We can use the fetch keyword. Fetch, fetches some information, the JSON object. And then we wait for fetch is actually returning a response. That's the promise. And we can use the then keyword for that. So it's been around for a while, right? That's the fetch API. That's based on JavaScript. And you can see we can also chain promises where we can go from one promise to the other. So I can fetch a promise, then I can do something, and after that, I can do something else, right? Like so. Pretty neat. I like it. So that's how it works. So it's been around for a while. We just haven't used it because we haven't had a call for it. I'm using it right now because it makes sense for us to use here in this format. Okay. Now there's an elephant in the room I got to talk about, which is we've been using require, we've been using const, but there's a better way to do it. And the better way to do it is let's convert this to Ecmascript 6. This is the old way. This is CommonJS. So, or CJS as it's called. So the way to convert this is if you hover over this, there's a little light bulb that comes on for us in Visual Studio Code. It's an amazing option for you, right? And what you can do is you can click onto it and it'll say, convert to ES module, ESM, okay? When I click onto this, it converts it and it looks like this. Now, that's the new Ecmascript 6 functionality. Take a look at this. Import whatever we're getting from the place we're getting it from. That's how the module works, okay? Now, in order for me to use this, I need to convert the other ones too. Let's do that. So go back into users.data. Let's convert this one to ES6. So again, right, kind of selecting all, looking at that little light bulb and convert to ESM, okay? And finally, let's do the hello. We're going to convert the whole thing to ESM. So we're going to kind of go here and we're going to, and just like before, it's going to say, oops, convert to ESM. Take a look at the difference. That the Ecmascript module or Ecmascript module pattern looks different than the common JS pattern, right? And the way it works like is it uses the export keyword like this. Okay, so export in 2 different exports. Very similar to what we've seen before when we use TypeScript. And same thing goes here. We've used the import structure. So import in curly braces, what you're importing, promises from the file system module, right? And we're actually using the promises, right? As an example, we're making an alias called file system promises that we're using here. Okay, cool. So that's what this does, but it's not going to work. And it's not going to work because if I try it out, if I go node.server.js, it's going to go, man, sorry, you have to change the type of the module to module. That's what it says in your package.json file. Okay, let's do that. So again, going back to my package.json, here's my package.json file. We don't have a type is equal to module here. Let's do that. We'll add another reference in my package.json. We'll say type, and it's equal to module. And when we do that, that is the thing that basically tells our project that we're actually making modules work here in Node.js. Type is module. Cool, okay, save. And then let's run it. Let's see if it works again. So again, going back here, clear, and oh man, it says that cannot find module this imported from this. It says, did you mean to import users.data.js? Huh. When we use module pattern, right, it kind of does funky things, right? So if we go to the server, it means that I want to do users.data.js. It needs this when we use from. Same thing with hello.js. Same thing when it comes to our not file system, anything else that we have here. So those 2 things we have to change. And if I save this and clear it and do the same thing, then now it works. It works the exact same way. This is the new module pattern we'll be using for the remainder of the semester. So when we import, if I go back to this, we don't have to import file system because file system is packaged. It's bundled along with everything else we're doing, right? And the new module pattern knows this. So all we need to do is include the stuff we want. Okay, so this is cool. Let's change that. So we'll say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say that we've added in or converted to ESM. Git push. So this is from CommonJS, which is what we talked about just now on the PowerPoint, to ESM, Ecmascript module pattern. That's what it means. ESM. Okay, this is neat, but there's more we can do. There's more we can do. So one thing that we can do is if we click on a function, I'm just looking at the users.data.js. If I click on the function, right, as an example, and if I kind of surround this thing, right, it kind of gives us another thing. It says convert named export to default export. That's something it allows us to do. Export default. That's another thing that it allows us to do. Again, let's run that. Export default basically says that this is the default function that we're going to use. And when we do that, it says get data doesn't compute. Get data doesn't compute. Because now when we say export default, then that means everything. So if I go back to our server.js, the reason why this doesn't compute get data is because, well, we're getting everything, right? That's what this means. So remember we used a friendly name called users before, right? So get data does not compute anymore. So again, that is neat, but that's not what we want. Let's go back to this and take off the export default keyword. Excellent. What about this function thing? So if I click on the function, this function part right here, there's a little light bulb that pops up and says convert to arrow function. Okay, I like that. So we can convert to arrow function. Converting to arrow functions is neat. What about this one? Can we convert this one to an arrow function too? Well, yes, but not yet. Okay. By the way, if we did this and I wanted to convert it to an arrow function, right? If there was an option for that, it would tell me that there is. Okay. What about in my let's keep on making it better. How about this one? Can I convert this one to an arrow function? Right? So export function says hello or say hello, or even in my server.js, is there a way of converting this to an arrow function? Well, that one, yes, it can. I can convert this one to an arrow function, and I can convert this one to an arrow function. And when I do that, if I was to format this, format selection, then you can see it does something that looks like this. So these arrow functions, remember what they do is they say, I have a function that has a data parameter which returns whatever. And if I hover over this, it says remove the unused declaration for error. I never used error. What it's saying is we probably should kind of put up what that error is because it's not used. So we can say something like plus error.message, right? That's what I want. So again, I can hover over this and it can give me suggestions. It says extract constant and enclosed scope, extract function and module scope. It's giving me additional code hinting. I think this is pretty good so far. I'm just making it better and better. Right? That's what I'm trying to do here for you. All right, cool. I like it. What about the other ones? Users.data. Is there something we can do here to make it better? And if I look over, it says convert named export to default, move to new, that kind of stuff. What if I want to convert this to a, can I convert this to a arrow function? Well, yes, right? Yes, I can. I could do this. Could say something like this, but it would be something like function. That's what I wanted to do, right? And or this, but then I would need a name for it, right? Which is like get data. And if I did this, I like it, export get data this, but it says that I can't do that unless I'm using TypeScript. So nice, but no. So again, it'll tell you when you can do it and when you can't, right? Okay. So no. Export function, right? Well, it'll only allow you to when you can do it, right? So we did it in server. We did it. We can't do it in user. What about in our hello? Well, hello. Is there a way of exporting this function and converting this to that as well? And the answer is not the way it's been coded right now. Let's test to see that it's better. So we're going to say node and it works. That's pretty good. And that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that result. Now, again, the way I've coded it here was different than how I did it earlier today. We did do this piece, right? And a lot of times what we want to do is put it up on one line, right? Where get data is its own thing, right? But notice what happened was in my server, there's no user anymore. Users is gone. Just get data and then do something with it, okay? Now we could do that. We could say that, let get data is whatever, but there's no need for it. All right, cool. So let's put this up. Git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say converted some functions to arrow. That's just a theme thing. All right, so any questions around this stuff? So a couple of things I want to share with you is some of the documentation that I use for this one. So again, this is NVM. We talked about this. There's also a little bit of an article from 2020 about Async Await, which I recommend. So I'm going to kind of put this inside the chat. Okay, I'll check that. No, it worked. It should work. Maybe I didn't do it right. Oh, the commit didn't work. I said git git commit, hit commit, and then push. There we go. There we go here. So yeah, that's from dev.to. There's this little article about async await with Node.js file system. I think it's a great article, and it talks about how you can use it and what you can do with it. So here's something that they did. They did async function, right, that they use. We just named our function, right? And then you can do a then and a catch, right? That's kind of what they did. So really great little article, and I think it's good to, kind of have these articles in play. All right, any questions around the stuff we talked about today? Because this is kind of like your warm-up, your warm-up for what we're doing on Friday. Again, all things being equal, right? Any questions around this stuff? If you don't understand, now is a great time to ask because I can answer your questions before we go for the day. All right, so different way of doing stuff, yeah? And especially with this import kind of statement. So here's a preview of what we can do. If we convert this thing to TypeScript, right? I'm just going to show you what this is. Again, I don't expect any of you guys to do this right now, but if I was to rename this file and I converted this server, just the server part, let's rename it, and we convert it to TypeScript, we start getting these weird kind of things here. It says, cannot find declaration file for module, right? And why? Because what TypeScript is expecting from everything is if I convert it, let's go and convert this one. So rename to TypeScript, right? Then again, this is okay, right? Because it's becoming TypeScript. And you can see that it fixed the one from hello, but it's like all of them have to be TypeScript afterwards. So rename, and we can say that this is also TypeScript, right? And it covers some of it, right? But then we get into this problem where there's a bit of an error. It says 1 to 2 arguments, but I got 3, right? And it says only I got 1 to 2 arguments, but I got 3. So where did this come from, right? Because, and this is where we get into some structure data, different structures. We want to try and fix this problem, right? And it says parameter data implicitly has any type. That's what this is. And we know what kind of data this is, right? This has got to be a string data that's coming inbound at this point. And what about this error, right? We don't know what this error is, right? So this is the kind of stuff that we're going to get when we start using TypeScript. We're going to start getting errors, and it's going to start asking for specific details about how we're going to get this done. The other thing to do when we start converting to TypeScript, again, this is a precursor, is we've got some interesting compiler options here, but we need to add a few more. And one of them that's going to come up on Friday is we're going to add in some interop functions, ES module interop. We want to turn that to true. And we're going to also add in the type, right? So we're going to say the module resolution type has to be node, which is an important piece as well. So when we save these, it makes a big difference in terms of how it does things. Also, we want to emit decorator metadata. We want to make that true as well. So these are all the different things we have to do to convert our stuff from one thing to the other. And it says emit design type metadata for decorations in source files cannot be specified without specifying the operator experimental decorators. Let's do that. And once we have all those things in place, it says that I think we're good to go. Yeah. And then now what it does is it starts looking at our files in a different way, right? Where we get a lot more information. Take a look at that. We get so much more information than we were getting before, right? So even though our user.data, it doesn't like it, it's not that this is all wrong. It's that some of this doesn't compute, right? It doesn't know what kind of error it is. It's almost like we need to rewrite the read file function and tell it what error the data we're getting. We know that it's going to be a string type. We know that for sure, right? And it says 1 to 2 parameters, but we're getting more. Let's turn this back into a regular function again, because that's what it's going to require us to do, right? We're going to turn this back into a regular function one more time, right? And let's see what we can get. In fact, a lot of times when I start writing TypeScript, and again, we'll get into this on Friday, is let's comment this out, right? And start rewriting it, right? I like to rewrite it sometimes because then I can see what I'm going to get from TypeScript and it can solve some of our problems. So again, I want to return await. That's what I want to say. And again, it's fs promises dot, and you can see I can do read file, but read file now gives me a couple of options, right? So I can sit there and say, okay, I want that read file to happen. Data, users.json, and we can kind of determine where it's going to be. So UTF-8 is the type. And then we can look at the callback function. Take a look. It says, well, there is no additional option. Look at that. There is no additional option for data anymore. It's like that whole module pattern for read file is broken with TypeScript. Take a look. So it says, so option number 2 is some kind of options, right? So again, path, options, and then is there another option for this other thing? And you can see that there isn't any. There isn't a callback function for this one at all, okay? So although it worked properly, one thing to note is that when it comes down to how TypeScript looks at it, right, you can see that it has the following thing. It says a path like, right, as an example, some kind of options, right, which are an encoding, some kind of flag, and then some kind of emitter. So it looks like either we're missing stuff, right, like some kind of thing that we're missing, followed by something else. And the way to determine this, because TypeScript is pretty cool in terms of figuring things out, why this is giving us an error, right? It doesn't understand what we're trying to do, right? If I use file system.read file, so if I did that, so if I did import file system, right, so I want to import file system. Let's try this out. Import file system, all right, or input from file system, right? How do I format? Import what from file system? Star from file system, right? Import from file system is equal to this, right? I could do this, back to this again, because TypeScript supports this stuff, right? I could do this part as well, right? And I could say that this is equal to fs.promises, because TypeScript supports both. That's what this is. fs.promises supports that. And then if I go back to the way it was, again, it says that it's the same problem. Right? Again, I'm going long because I want to explain how we could fix stuff with TypeScript when it comes to file system and promises, right? So that is definitely an issue. It says doesn't like what you're doing there. All right, cool. So what about if we didn't use promises at all and we just use the file system, which is what this does, right? Now we see that we're not getting an error anymore, but is it going to work? That's the problem. And it says remove unnecessary await. Huh. Well, what does this mean? First, we'll transpile. Again, don't worry about this, guys. I'm just showing this because Friday is a really weird day for us all, right? And once we've converted everything, right, then now we can run it. right? So let's run it in PowerShell. And let's do that. So we'll say node server.js. We're going to get this issue where it says exports is not defined in an ES module scope, right? We're looking at it as this. And what it's saying is it wants to convert this, right, from import fs as required to something else. So how do I convert this, right, to an export keyword, right? Because this is using module format, and I want to get access to the file system, right, from what it was before. How do I do that? Well, again, it's import file system, right, is what we want to do, right? And we want to use the file system. If I don't do this part, right, then it says, I don't know what file system means, okay? So I need to do this part. Import file system, from, and usually we want to do from the file system, right? That's what we want to do, something like this, right? And that equates because now file system knows what to do, right? And now once we've saved that, we can try and run it again. And it says, okay, cool. But it says reference error, exports is not defined in ES module, right? And the file being treated as an ES module because it has a JS file extension, blah, blah, blah. And it's pointing to server.js. Okay, so server.js, that's here. And here's my server.ts, which is in here. So you can look at the call stack and see what's happening. On line 2, it's trying to import my hello.js. That is this problem. It's saying that this is an issue, right? Where I'm trying to export my functions, right? Export. And what I want to say with TypeScript is that it's equal to this, right? That's what I want to kind of say. It's, export is equal to this says hello function. That's what I want to say, right? Where module export, I want to export says hello. That's what I want to do, right? And I want to export multiple copies of them. So what is the problem, right? Believe it or not, it says contains type module to treat it as a common JS script, rename it to CJS file, right? So because we've moved our package.json, let's go to package.json, because we've done this, it now is causing a problem for TypeScript. Let's see if I remove that and see what happens again, right? Well, now it works. But the problem is I'm getting undefined, right? So let's fix that problem. So let's go back into our user.data, and fix this problem again, because we got an async await and we don't have a promise. Let's put that back. So fs promises, but when I convert back, fs promises doesn't like this functionality, even though if I write it and I convert it, it works. It doesn't like it because TypeScript doesn't understand it, right? Doesn't get it. It doesn't get what I'm trying to do. Even though I've specified it's a string, it doesn't get it because read file only has 2 parameters inside of the type definition file as opposed to 3. Okay, there's ways to fix this, and we'll get to it on Friday. So for now, we're going to leave it like this in TypeScript. One thing also we've noticed is that I keep on doing this, node server.js, node server.js. And to avoid this, for changes, there's a couple things to do. One, we can go into our package.json. And our package.json, let's make it so that we can change it from our index to server. There is no index. So we'll change this to server. And we'll change another thing we want to do is in our package.json, we want to change our start script. We want to kind of define our start script. And we can say that when we used npm start, it actually does node server.js. That's almost like a little batch file we can run, right? So instead of doing node server.js, we just can do npm start. And npm start, when we do it properly, will run that same file, right? That's what npm start is, kind of like a shorthand for saying node server.js. And you can have as many switches and stuff in here as you want. Well, the great thing is there's a package you can download to make this even better, which is called Nodemon. So try this. Try npm install nodemon -g. And what Nodemon does, once you finish installing it, it is a node daemon, right? Which basically allows you to wait. It watches for this thing to complete. So what I can do then, just like we used light server, is down in here, I can just type in Nodemon. And what Nodemon does is it'll wait. Take a look at this. It's waiting for me to change something in order for me to, kind of output my stuff, right? Let's go back into my server, my users.data.ts. Here's my user.data.ts. You can see I'm not using promises anymore, right? So what about if I return it as, remember we talked about this? I want to convert it as a promise. Can I do that as a promise? Well, there is something that I can do, right? As promises, as promise-like, because that's what I want to do. I can say it's as a promise. The problem with making it as a promise is it doesn't understand what promise is, right? But that's kind of what we want to do. We want to convert this to a promise, right? Because the reason why this async await isn't working is because it's not a promise yet. Okay. But the great thing is, watch this. Once I save, it updates things every single time, and I can do that with my hello. To prove this, if I change my goodbye message to goodbye world, right? Save. You can see that that immediately restarts it. It's a watch task that runs my stuff. There's no class tomorrow, Cooper. It's all Friday. So I'll let you guys know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save everything. I'm going to put things up, if just in case we don't have class on Friday. I'm going to make a little video for you guys anyway. And you execute the TypeScript, Control-Shift-B to do that. So last part is trying to fix this piece, right? Which is, making the promise work with TypeScript. So again, if we look it up, if you say something like TypeScript node file system promise, right? And you kind of look at that, it says how to use TypeScript async await with promise in Node.js, right? They have some solutions for this, right? Where what you can do, look at that write file, right? We return a new promise of type, whatever we want to do, where we have a resolve reject. Take a look at that new structure. And there's an async, right? This is a way of doing it with TypeScript. Okay. But the wrapper function, because in Node.js, we already have an async function, right? We know that. That's something that is also something that they're using file system write file, right? Where it talks about how you're going to, to do it this way. But what we want is for TypeScript node fs file system read file promise. Okay, that's what we want. And a lot of times this is a newer one. So we import, look at this, star from fs, right? As fs from fs. It says you can import something like promisify from utility, right? And then what you can do is create a promise, which is a string, and you can promisify, right? This thing to whatever you're looking at. So you can change your read file into a promise. right? Which is kind of a neat thing. And util is something that's part of the file system. Let's see if we can do that really quickly, and then we'll stop for the day. So again, we can say import, just like it says, promifify from util. There it is. And instead of using file system promises the old way, like we did it before, right? What we want to do is do something that looks like this, right? We want to make a string promise, right? So that's what we want to do. Let's just do it the exact same way it's saying it. I'm just going to actually copy this code. Again, TypeScript has some weird stuff. So we want to make a promise, right? Content is going to be the thing that we're returning, right? That's what it is. And we're going to permissify file system read to the path, which is this. We're going to do this part right here. And it doesn't like encoding. It says encoding options is no overload that matches this for the type, right? So what we're doing is we're passing in the read file function, right? And we're saying what type it is. And I wonder if there's an encoding option that's different than this. Since 2008, 2018 has changed, right? Encoding. And I wonder if there is an encoding type. Yeah. That's it. So this is the way we want to do it. And we want to save it into content, which means, and again, this is using async await. I wonder if I was to comment this out, let's block that out. And we want to return this part as an export. I think what I need to do is do exactly that, what it is. Let's say we're going to export, we're going to make that into a thing, a named object, content. Call it get data, right? And we'll do the same thing here where we say export get data. And why? Yep. More reading to be done, guys. It's, again, lots and lots of stuff that's happening here. Permissify this, and that's going to equal to a string. So the get data is a type that's equal to this. I wonder if I really need to even do that. If I can just do this. Doesn't like that export keyword, huh? Yeah. I think it's what you need to do. Let's try this out and see if I'm crazy. And I am. Says that doesn't like it. It doesn't like it. Permissify, huh? Permissify. But do I have to do something specific? That didn't work. So yeah, we'll figure it out. Me personally, just want to look at something here for the file system. I wonder if there is something else I'm missing from a package perspective. And I'm sorry to do this to you guys. Normally I don't like to troubleshoot like this with you guys, but I wonder if add at types file system. Nope, part of Node. Pretty sure it was. I wasn't sure if they had added anything else since then. But again, that's pretty much what it is, guys. We just have to figure out this part. That part is didn't quite work the way I was expecting. Too bad. And there's a module for that. There's a module for that. Async await with the file to a path. But how many? Oh, one thing to know with modules, guys, please take a look at the amount of weekly downloads, 77,000 downloads to do this one. This is read file with promise, right? File system read file promise, right? And I wonder if this would work in TypeScript. I wonder if. So this is another module you can add a separate external file. File system read file promise. Let's try that out. Just curious. Yarn add file system read file promise. And is there TypeScript for that? Yarn add at types. If there's not, taking it out. File system read file as promise. Yep. And then I bet we can do this stuff where I can kind of return an async function with a const buffer await. Great file, right? Buffer to string. So that means that I can do that async await stuff that I did before here, but do I have to have it? Const read file promise. Read file promise. But when did they use it? Read file promise. Oh, this is it. Const read file promise. I don't think this is going to work personally, but anyway. Let's try that out. Import read file promise. Sorry, import fs read file promise from this. Okay, and then I think as we'll call it fs read file. Well, let's do that. So fs read file promise, we'll do that. And I wonder if we just can kind of pop that in there. This read file promise dot encoding. Okay, so you actually remove this part altogether. Now we're getting a little bit crazy. UTF-8. And then it returns the file and stores it as that. So we don't even need all this other. So basically what it's saying is we don't need all this stuff. It does all of that for us. And if I press save, then we can get rid of all this. And let's see what it does in my node stuff. And now it works. There it is. Just using something else. All right, so again, we just use an external file to fix it. I think there's personally other things we can do to do the same thing, but this is definitely a way of doing it. Okay, so what we did was package.json. We added in a new package called file system read file promise. It's a third-party plugin, right? That we did. We also included the types for file system read file promise. And then inside of the users.data.js, .ts, we simplified everything by using the async await function, just like we've done before, where we're using file system read file promise. And then what it does is it returns a promise object. And we need to return a promise if we're going to do things the way it is. I don't even think we need read file. We need file system anymore because we're using this one. Yeah. So that's all we need. So we're using an external module for this instead. And of course, now that this is the way it is, we can convert this. Yeah, we can. We've inferred the return type, and we can put this up on GitHub. So again, guys, I mean, again, I know that there's a lot going on here, but it's not difficult to figure out. We'll say fixed promise error in users.data.ts. So I kind of did it today, but there it is. Should we have this fix ready to go for Friday? No, I'm just showing it here because, again, this is just practice. So don't worry about it. It's up on GitHub anyway, Cooper. And I'm showing you this because when we convert to TypeScript, whenever we do, there's some funky things that we're going to find that work nicely in JS. And then when we convert to TypeScript, the reason why TypeScript doesn't like it is because either of a couple of things. One, our TypeScript config.json does not include module resolution node, experimental decorators, emit decorator metadata, or ES module interrupt. That's the first part. These 4 new switches. That's the reason. One reason why it doesn't work. The other thing is that module right now is CommonJS, and module pattern can also be switched outside of CommonJS. That's something that we're going to look at. One thing we also never checked, just to let you know, is how did this screw up anything we've done here with our regular stuff? So if I was to run things like light server, does this still work? And that's something that you also have to look at and see if it works still. Because if light server doesn't work, then it kind of defeats the purpose of all the stuff we've done so far. And you can see that clearly it works, right? So the front end and the back end have totally different things to do with each other, which is an important piece. Yeah, absolutely. That's all you need to do. Questions around the stuff we did today. I know that it was a little bit convoluted and we went over by about half an hour, but I did it because I want to share with you a few more things before Friday. That's all. Friday's going to be a tight day, if we have it. Any questions before we go for the day? All right, Cooper, Eden, Emin, Deontay, or Nathusan, Anur, Will, anybody? We're all good? Okay, hopefully you got it, guys. Again, I'm trying to show you the structure of how Node works. That was the exercise. Don't worry about the specifics because we're going to modify this stuff anyway. This is just for practice, like I said. Our server.ts is not going to look like this. Our users.data.js is not even going to be used. All right, we're not going to use this stuff. I'm showing you to make you understand how things are knit together. That's all it is. All right, guys, hopefully that helped and it was useful for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all on Friday, one way or another.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Thank you for your patience.